The border town of Eagle Pass sat like a forgotten postcard, trapped between two worlds, the bustling promise of American opportunity and the rugged landscape of rural Texas. Here, where the Rio Grande carved its ancient path and the sky stretched infinitely, 12-year-old Sarah Rodriguez discovered her first true love, machines. The Rodriguez household was a shrine to mechanical precision. Every Sunday after church, while other families gathered for elaborate lunches, Sarah would sit beside her father in their modest garage, a sacred space where engines spoke a language more profound than words. Miguel Rodriguez's massive hands, scarred and calloused from years of military service and mechanical work, would guide Sarah's smaller fingers across engine components with a gentleness that belied his tough exterior. "Look here, Mia," Miguel would say, his voice a low rumble. That carried decades of stories. An engine is like a living thing. It has a heartbeat, a rhythm. You don't just fix it, you understand it. Sarah absorbed every word, every lesson. While her classmates talked about pop stars and social media, she could diagnose a failing transmission. "I sound alone." Her mother, Elena, a local high school literature teacher, would watch from the doorway with a mixture of concern and pride. She had dreams of her daughter becoming a scholar, perhaps a lawyer or a writer who could change the world with words. But Sarah's world was built of metal, precision, and the roar of engines. The Apache helicopter models that dominated Miguel's study were more than decorations. They were Sarah's first true maps of possibility. Each model was a meticulously crafted testament to engineering and human courage. Some were gifts from fellow veterans, others carefully assembled by Miguel himself during long nights after his mechanic shifts. Sarah knew every detail of these models: the H-64, Apache's complex weapon systems, its remarkable maneuverability, the stories of pilots who had transformed these machines from mere metal into instruments of protection. Miguel's own history was etched into these models. A former Army helicopter mechanic who had served during complex international missions, he had seen the world from perspectives most people could never imagine. His stories weren't glamorous Hollywood war tales, but nuanced narratives of human complexity. He spoke of missions where technology met humanity, where a perfectly maintained machine could mean the difference between life and death. "Technology is neutral," he would tell Sarah. "It's the human behind the machine that gives it purpose. Courage isn't about being fearless. It's about understanding your tools, knowing your capabilities, and making split-second decisions that protect others." Sarah's school experience was a constant battle. Small for her age, with intense dark eyes that seemed to look through people rather than at them, she didn't fit the typical preteen mold. While other girls discussed makeup and boys, Sarah was more interested in the physics of flight, the mathematical precision required to navigate complex aerial maneuvers. Her teachers recognized her exceptional intelligence, but were unsure how to channel it. Mrs. Thompson, her science teacher, was the first to truly see Sarah's potential. During a sixth-grade career day, while other students gave predictable presentations about becoming doctors or teachers, Sarah's project was a comprehensive analysis of helicopter aerodynamics, complete with hand-drawn diagrams and mathematical calculations that most high school students would struggle to comprehend. "She's extraordinary," Mrs. Thompson would later tell Elena during a parent-teacher conference. But extraordinary often means different, and different can be challenging. At home, the dynamics were complex. Elena worried about the potential dangers of Sarah's emerging passion. "Not every battle is meant to be fought," she would whisper. To Miguel, her voice filled with a mother's protective instinct. The military had already taken so much from families they knew. Careers cut short, lives forever altered by conflict. Miguel understood her fears, but saw something else in Sarah. He saw resilience. He saw a spirit that couldn't be contained by traditional expectations. Some are born to observe the world, he would say, and some are born to change it. The turning point came unexpectedly on Sarah's 12th birthday. Instead of the typical gifts, clothes, jewelry, electronics, Miguel presented her with something extraordinary. It was a restored vintage radio communication set from his military days, carefully refurbished to perfect working condition. This, he told her, his eyes gleaming with a mix of pride and something deeper, recognition, perhaps, is where communication meets technology. This is where strategy is born. Sarah spent weeks learning every nuance of the radio system. She studied communication protocols, learned about frequency modulation, and began to understand how information could be as powerful as any weapon. Her bedroom transformed into a mini command center, filled with technical manuals, diagrams, and an ever-growing collection of mechanical components. Elena would sometimes stand in the doorway, watching her daughter, this extraordinary blend of technical brilliance and unbridled imagination. She saw not just a child, but a future that was waiting to be written. The spark of defiance had been lit, and in the vast, open skies above Eagle Pass, something remarkable was taking shape. A future that would challenge every existing narrative about what a young woman from a small border town could achieve. Sarah Rodriguez was going to fly, not just in machines, but beyond every limitation that had ever been placed upon her. The United States Military Academy at West Point was not designed for someone like Sarah Rodriguez. The institution had existed for centuries, its stone walls holding the echoes of generations of male cadets who had defined military excellence. From the moment she arrived, Sarah understood she would be more than a student. She would be a statement. Her first week was a deliberate assault on everything she believed about herself. Captain Marcus Harrison, a veteran of multiple combat deployments and the Academy's most notorious training instructor, seemed personally offended by her presence. Standing 6'3", with a granite jaw and eyes that could strip paint, Harrison made it his mission to break her spirit. Rodriguez, he would bark during morning formations, his voice a weapon designed to expose weakness. You think you belong here? This isn't a diversity showcase. This is where warriors are forged. Sarah learned quickly that surviving meant more than physical endurance. It meant psychological resilience. While other cadets crumbled under the intense scrutiny, she transformed each criticism into fuel. Her background, growing up maintaining engines with her father, understanding the intricate dance of mechanical precision, gave her an advantage that went beyond traditional military training. The physical challenges were brutal. 5-mile runs before dawn, obstacle courses designed to push you in limits, combat training that seemed to blur the lines between preparation and punishment. Male cadets would exchange knowing glances, expecting Sarah to be the first to quit. Instead, she consistently ranked at the top of her class. Her breakthrough came during a complex night navigation exercise, while other cadets struggled with map reading and terrain interpretation. Sarah moved like she had been born with an internal compass. Where others saw darkness and confusion, she saw opportunity and strategy. During one particularly challenging exercise, a massive thunderstorm transformed the training ground into a treacherous landscape. Visibility was near zero, and GPS systems were rendered useless. Most cadets huddled, waiting for guidance. Sarah methodically broke down the terrain, using topographical knowledge, wind direction, and her understanding of natural landmarks to navigate perfectly. Captain Harrison watched in disbelief as she completed the course not just successfully, but with a precision that made the exercise look almost simple. Her classmates began to see her differently, no longer just the woman who didn't belong, but a potential leader who was redefining what belonging meant. Her academic performance was equally extraordinary. While many cadets specialized in single disciplines, Sarah consumed knowledge like oxygen. Advanced mathematics, aerodynamic engineering, geopolitical strategy. She approached each subject with a holistic understanding that separated her from her peers. Dr. Elena Petrova, a renowned aerospace engineering professor, took special notice. During a specialized seminar on helicopter dynamics, Sarah's questions went beyond the typical cadet's understanding. She wasn't just learning, she was challenging existing paradigms. Most cadets memorize. Dr. Petrova would later tell her colleagues. Rodriguez reimagines. There's a fundamental difference. The psychological warfare was constant. Some male cadets attempted to undermine her through subtle sabotage. Equipment would mysteriously malfunction before her training exercises. Rumors would circulate, attempting to diminish her achievements. But Sarah had learned from her father that true strength wasn't about avoiding challenges. It was about transforming them into opportunities. Her roommate, Jessica Carter, became an unexpected ally. A tall, athletic woman from Montana with a background in competitive skiing, Jessica recognized genuine talent when she saw it. "They're trying to break you," she would tell Sarah during late-night study sessions. "But you're not breakable." The turning point came during a critical flight simulation that would determine advanced training opportunities. The scenario was designed to be nearly impossible. Multiple threat vectors, limited resources, civilian protection protocols that seemed mutually exclusive. Where other cadets froze or made fatal tactical errors, Sarah's performance was nothing short of revelatory. Her virtual Apache moved like liquid mercury, anticipating threats before they fully materialized. She didn't just complete the mission, she redefined what mission completion could look like. The simulation room fell silent. Even Captain Harrison, who had spent years trying to expose her limitations, found himself transfixed. After the simulation, he approached her with something resembling respect. "Rodriguez," he said, his voice stripped of its usual contempt, "you're not just going to be a pilot. You're going to redefine what being a pilot means." It was more than a compliment. It was a recognition that Sarah Rodriguez was not an exception to the rule, but a new definition of excellence. As her academy years progressed, she became more than a student. She became a symbol of possibility. Young women would look at her and see a pathway that hadn't existed before. Military strategists would study her approach and recognize that innovation doesn't have a gender. The walls of West Point, which had stood as a monument to traditional military excellence, were subtly being reshaped. And at the center of that transformation was a young woman from a small Texas border town who refused to be defined by anyone's limitations but her own. The Middle Eastern desert was nothing like the simulated environments of West Point. It was a living, breathing entity that challenged every preconception Sarah Rodriguez had about warfare, survival, and human complexity. Her first deployment came with the 1st Attack Reconnaissance Battalion, 227th Aviation Regiment, a unit with a storied history of precision and valor. The base was a labyrinth of controlled chaos, helicopters humming like mechanical insects, soldiers moving with a choreographed urgency that spoke of constant readiness, and an underlying tension that vibrated through the air like heat lightning. Lieutenant Rodriguez arrived with a reputation that preceded her. Her instructor's recommendations had painted her as more than just a pilot. She was a strategic asset. But reputation meant little in the real theater of war. Here, survival was measured in split-second decisions and the ability to read landscapes. That shifted like mirages. Her Apache, call sign Phantom, became an extension of her being. During initial briefings, senior officers noticed something different about her approach. While other pilots spoke in tactical jargon, Sarah saw the mission as a complex ecosystem. Her pre-flight preparations were almost ritualistic, not just checking mechanical systems, but understanding the geopolitical nuances of their current operation. The humanitarian convoy mission seemed straightforward on paper. Protect aid workers. delivering medical supplies to a remote village caught between competing militant factions. But in this region, nothing was ever simple. The terrain was a nightmare of contradictions. Vast stretches of desert gave way to rocky outcroppings that could hide entire squadrons. Intelligence reports were frustratingly incomplete, filled with more speculation than concrete information. Sarah spent hours studying satellite imagery, topographical maps, and intercepted communications, building a mental landscape that went beyond traditional reconnaissance. Her squadron commander, Lieutenant Colonel James Reeves, watched her with a mixture of curiosity and cautious optimism. A veteran of multiple conflicts, Reeves had seen countless young pilots come and go, but Sarah was different. Her briefing notes were works of strategic art, not just reporting information, but anticipating potential scenarios with a chess master's precision. Rodriguez understands something most pilots miss. Reeves would later tell his command staff. War isn't about equipment. It's about understanding the human element. The mission began like countless others, a slow, methodical approach over terrain that seemed both empty and infinitely dangerous. A humanitarian convoy moved below, a fragile line of hope cutting through a landscape scarred by decades of conflict. Sarah's Apache maintained a carefully calculated patrol pattern, her eyes constantly scanning multiple threat vectors. It happened quickly, too quickly. The first technical vehicle appeared like a mirage, a modified pickup truck mounting a heavy machine gun, emerging from a rocky outcropping that seemed impossible to traverse. Traditional protocols would suggest maintaining altitude, assessing the threat. But Sarah saw something else, a pattern of movement that suggested multiple potential ambush points. Her radio communication was crisp, devoid of emotion. Multiple hostiles, northwest quadrant, preparing defensive maneuver. The next 60 seconds would become a case study in modern aerial combat. Sarah's Apache transformed from a mere machine to a living weapon, countermeasures deployed with surgical precision. Her missile targeting system locked onto potential threat sources before the ground units could fully comprehend the developing situation. Where other pilots might hesitate, she moved with a fluidity that seemed to defy traditional combat logic. 3 insurgent technicals were neutralized before they could fully engage the convoy. Her missile strikes were so precisely calculated that subsequent battle damage assessment would show minimal collateral damage, a rarity in such intense combat scenarios. But war is never clean, never simple. In the aftermath of the engagement, Sarah experienced something veteran pilots rarely discussed, the profound psychological weight of taking human life. The tactical success felt hollow, replaced by a complex, emotional landscape that no training could fully prepare her for. Her squadron members watched in a mixture of awe and respect. The young pilot who had been an academic curiosity at West Point had transformed into something else entirely. A warrior who understood that technology was merely a tool, and human understanding was the true weapon. Lieutenant Colonel Reeves approached her after the mission, his weathered face betraying a mixture of emotions. "You saved lives today, Rodriguez," he said, his voice carrying the weight of decades of military experience. "But remember, every life saved is connected to a life potentially taken. That's the burden we carry." Sarah's response was telling. "Sir, my job isn't just about saving our people. It's about minimizing overall human cost." Word of the mission spread quickly through military channels. Intelligence reports began to paint her of a new kind of pilot, one who saw beyond traditional combat paradigms. The nickname Phantom was no longer just a call sign. It was becoming a legend. Back at base, during the mission debrief, Sarah was clinical in her assessment. But her squadron saw something else. A young woman who was processing the profound complexity of modern warfare. She wasn't celebrating a victory. She was understanding its deeper implications. Her father's words echoed in her mind. Technology is neutral. It's the human behind the machine that gives it purpose. In the unforgiving landscape of conflict, Sarah Rodriguez was rewriting the definition of purpose, one mission at a time. Information travels faster than bullets in modern warfare. And in the complex landscape of international conflict, reputation could be as deadly as any weapon system. The intercepted communications began as whispers, fragmented intelligence reports. That grew more substantive with each passing week. Sarah Rodriguez was no longer just another pilot. She had become a strategic nightmare for enemy combatants, a phantom that seemed to anticipate their every move. Intelligence analysts at the forward operating base tracked the escalating chatter. What had started as isolated mentions in encrypted communications was transforming into a full-blown obsession. Enemy commanders were discussing her with a mixture of fear and grudging respect. They had a name for her now, Al-Sayida, the lady, spoken with a tone that was part terror, part dark admiration. Major Hassan al-Khaled was the first to formally recognize the strategic threat she represented. A veteran strategist who had survived multiple international conflicts. He understood that modern warfare was as much about psychological warfare as it was about physical combat. During a clandestine meeting in a secure location, he presented a comprehensive dossier on Lieutenant Rodriguez to his most trusted lieutenants. She is not just a pilot, Al-Khaled explained, his voice low and measured. She is a systemic disruption to our entire operational framework. The dossier was comprehensive. Sarah's mission records, her academy performance, intercepted communications. From her squadron, every detail meticulously collected. But what truly concerned Al-Khalid was her ability to read battlefield dynamics in ways that seemed almost prescient. 3 separate squadrons were tasked with a singular mission: neutralize the Phantom pilot. It was more than a military objective. It had become a matter of pride, of restoring a sense of strategic control that Rodriguez had systematically dismantled. Their intelligence suggested they understood her typical patrol routes, her preferred attack vectors. They believed they had studied her perfectly. What they didn't understand was that Sarah was always 3 moves ahead. The preparation was elaborate. Advanced fighter jets were retrofitted with the latest electronic warfare systems. Ground-based anti-aircraft units were repositioned. Entire communication networks were reconfigured to create a complex trap designed to anticipate and neutralize her Apache. Sarah, meanwhile, was conducting her own intelligence gathering. Her approach to combat had evolved beyond traditional military doctrine. She wasn't just a pilot executing missions. She was a strategic analyst who happened to fly an attack helicopter. Her relationship with her electronic warfare specialist, Sergeant David Chun, became crucial. Chun was a technical prodigy who could read electronic signatures like most people read books. Together, they developed a dynamic approach to mission planning that was decades ahead of standard military doctrine. It's not about having the best technology, Chun would often say during their mission prep sessions. It's about understanding the ecosystem of information. Their approach was holistic. They didn't just prepare for missions, they created entire predictive models of potential conflict scenarios. Satellite imagery, intercepted communications, environmental data, historical conflict patterns. Everything was integrated into a comprehensive strategic framework. The trap was set during a critical mission protecting a series of humanitarian aid transfer points. Enemy intelligence believed they had created the perfect ambush. Multiple fighter jets were positioned at strategic points, ground-based anti-aircraft. Units were carefully hidden, and communication jamming systems were prepared to neutralize her electronic advantages. What happened next would become a legendary moment in modern military history. Sarah's Apache approached the mission area with a calm that bordered on the supernatural. Where most pilots would show heightened stress, she displayed an almost meditative focus. Her communication with her squadron was crisp, precise, devoid of unnecessary emotion. The enemy fighters believed they were the hunters. They were about to discover they were tragically mistaken. As the first fighter jets moved to intercept, Sarah's response was nothing short of revolutionary. Instead of following predictable evasion patterns, she did something completely unexpected. She didn't just avoid the threat, she transformed the entire battlefield's dynamics. Electronic countermeasures deployed with a complexity that suggested artificial intelligence rather than human intervention. Her Apache moved not just with mechanical precision, but with a kind of situational awareness that seemed to predict threats before they fully materialized. One by one, the carefully positioned enemy assets found themselves neutralized, not through direct destruction, but through a systematic dismantling of their operational capabilities. Communication networks collapsed. Positioning systems became unreliable. The sophisticated trap designed to hunt her became a mechanism of their own destruction. Lieutenant Colonel Reeves, monitoring the mission from the command center, could only watch in a mixture of professional admiration and something close to awe. "She's not just fighting," he muttered to his command staff. "She's rewriting the entire concept of aerial combat." When the mission concluded, the statistics were staggering. Multiple enemy fighter jets neutralized. Critical aid transfer points completely secured. Minimal collateral damage. 0 friendly casualties. But the true victory was psychological. The myth of the phantom pilot had just been elevated from military legend to something approaching military mythology. In the complex world of modern warfare, Sarah Rodriguez was proving that the most powerful weapon was never about the technology. It was about the human mind behind the technology, its ability to adapt, to anticipate, to transform potential defeat into absolute victory. The mission began like a whisper, almost imperceptible in the grand tapestry of military operations. But whispers, in the world of high-stakes combat, can transform into hurricanes in moments. Intelligence had been fragmented, almost cryptic. A critical humanitarian corridor needed protection, not just from local insurgent groups, but from a more complex network of international actors who saw the region as a strategic chessboard. Sarah Rodriguez was not just a pilot for this mission. She was to be the entire chess strategy. Her Apache, meticulously prepared, carried more than just advanced weaponry. It was loaded with the most sophisticated electronic warfare systems ever deployed in a combat zone. Sergeant David Chun had spent weeks custom configuring every single system, transforming the helicopter into something that was part machine, part living intelligence. "This isn't just about flying," Chun had told her during the final mission prep. "This is about creating an information ecosystem that we control completely." The mission area was a nightmare of geographical complexity. Mountainous terrain that could hide entire battalions, communication dead zones that could swallow entire squadrons, and a geopolitical landscape so intricate that traditional military doctrine seemed almost obsolete. What made this mission unique was the intelligence they had gathered. Multiple international actors had converged on this specific corridor, each with their own agenda, each believing they could outmaneuver the others. Sarah's role was not just protection. It was strategic disruption. Her squadron commander, Lieutenant Colonel Reeves, pulled her aside during the final briefing. His face carried the weight of decades of military experience, a map of conflicts fought and lessons learned. "Rodriguez," he said, his voice low and intense, "this is beyond a standard protection mission. You're not just defending a corridor. You're going to be sending a message that will echo through multiple intelligence networks." The first indication that this would be no ordinary mission came just 30 minutes after she entered the operational zone. Electronic signatures began to appear, not just from local insurgent groups, but from multiple state-sponsored units that were supposedly neutral parties. They were hunting her, not just as a military target, but as a symbol. Multiple advanced fighter jets began converging on her position. These were not local militia with retrofitted equipment. These were state-of-the-art aircraft piloted by some of the most experienced combat pilots in the region. Each had been specifically briefed on taking down the legendary Phantom pilot. What they didn't understand was that Sarah Rodriguez had been preparing for this moment her entire life. Her Apache moved through the complex terrain with a fluidity that defied traditional understanding of aerial combat. Where most pilots would see obstacles, she saw opportunities. Mountain ranges became defensive positions. Communication dead. Zones transformed into strategic advantages. The enemy communications, initially confident, began to shift. Confusion crept into their tactical network. Their carefully planned intercept became a series of increasingly desperate maneuvers. And then came the moment that would transform military legend. As the fighter jets closed in, believing they had her cornered, Sarah did something unprecedented. Her radio communication cut through their frequencies, not with panic, not with military jargon, but with a laugh. It wasn't a nervous laugh. It wasn't a crazy laugh. It was a laugh of pure, calculated confidence. A sound that seemed to say, "You have no idea what's coming." In that single moment, the entire psychological warfare dynamic shifted. Her electronic countermeasures were beyond anything they had encountered. Communication networks collapsed. Targeting systems became unreliable. The advanced fighter jets found themselves not just neutralized, but systematically dismantled. One by one, the hunters became the hunted. Missile systems that should have tracked her precisely began to malfunction. Advanced fighter jets that represented millions in military investment began to fall from the sky, not through direct destruction, but through a systematic breakdown of their operational capabilities. The radio laugh continued, not as a taunt, but as a strategic tool. It became a psychological weapon that penetrated their communication networks, creating a level of confusion that was more destructive than any physical weapon. When the encounter concluded, the statistics were beyond comprehension. Multiple state-of-the-art fighter jets neutralized. The humanitarian corridor completely secured. 0 friendly casualties. And a psychological impact that would reverberate through international military circles for years to come. Military analysts would later spend countless hours trying to deconstruct what had happened. How could a single pilot in a single Apache helicopter systematically dismantle what was essentially a multinational hunting party? The answer was both simple and complex. Sarah Rodriguez was not just a pilot. She was a strategic ecosystem, a living, breathing example of how human intelligence could transform technological capabilities. Her squadron watched in a mixture of professional admiration and something close to awe. Lieutenant Colonel Reeves, monitoring the entire operation, understood they had just witnessed something beyond a military engagement. They had seen the future of combat, where psychological warfare, technological integration, and human strategy converged into a single devastating point of impact. The laugh that echoed through the combat frequencies that day was more than just a sound. It was a statement. A declaration that in the complex world of modern warfare, the most powerful weapon was never about the technology. It was about the human mind behind the technology. The world of international military intelligence is a labyrinth of carefully guarded secrets, encrypted communications, and strategic narratives. But some moments break through those barriers, creating ripple effects that transform entire geopolitical landscapes. Sarah Rodriguez's legendary encounter was one such moment. The initial reports were clinical, stripped of the human drama that had unfolded. Military communiques spoke of a successful interdiction mission and strategic neutralization of multiple hostile assets. But those words were a pale shadow of what had actually transpired. Within hours, the story began to spread through military communication channels, not through official reports, but through the intricate network of military personnel who understood the true significance of what had occurred. Pilots, intelligence officers, strategic analysts, they began to piece together a narrative that was part technological marvel, part human revolution. Dr. Elena Petrova, the aerospace engineering professor who had first recognized Sarah's potential at West Point, was now a senior military technology consultant. She understood immediately that this was more than a single mission. This was a paradigm shift in modern warfare. It's not about the technology, she told a closed-door congressional hearing, her voice carrying the weight of decades of research. It's about how human intelligence can transform technological capabilities. Rodriguez didn't just use her equipment. She became an integrated system. The psychological impact was immediate and far-reaching. Enemy military networks that had once been confident began to show signs of strategic paralysis. The myth of the phantom pilot was no longer just a military legend. It had become a psychological weapon more powerful than any missile system. Military psychologists began to study the encounter in depth. The laugh, that singular moment of audio communication, became a case study in psychological warfare. How could a single sound create such profound disorientation? How did one pilot manage to transform a hunting mission into a complete strategic defeat? Lieutenant Colonel James Reeves found himself at the center of a complex narrative. Military leadership wanted a comprehensive breakdown of the mission, but the true story defied traditional reporting mechanisms. How do you explain a mission where technological superiority was completely nullified by human strategy? Sarah herself was somewhat removed from the immediate aftermath. While military analysts dissected every moment of the encounter, she was completing a series of follow-up missions with her characteristic precision. Her squadron noticed something different, a subtle shift in how other units interacted with them. Respect was no longer something to be earned. It had been instantaneously granted. The international implications were profound. Military procurement. Departments in multiple countries began re-evaluating their entire approach to aerial combat systems. The traditional model of technological superiority was being challenged. If one pilot could systematically dismantle multiple advanced fighter jets, what did that mean for billion-dollar weapons programs? Intelligence agencies from various countries began their own investigations. Was Rodriguez an anomaly? Or was she a preview of a new kind of military operator, one who saw technology as an extension of human strategy rather than a replacement for it? Her father, Miguel Rodriguez, watched the unfolding narrative with a mixture of pride and understanding. During an interview with a military documentary team, he offered a perspective that would become widely quoted. "Some people are born to observe the world," he said, his weathered hands gesturing with the precision of a mechanic, "and some are born to change it. My daughter? She was born to reimagine it." The personal toll was significant. Sarah found herself at the center of a narrative that was rapidly spinning beyond her control. Military leadership wanted her to become a poster child for recruitment. Media outlets sought interviews. Strategic think tanks requested her insights. But Sarah understood something deeper. This wasn't about personal glory. This was about demonstrating a fundamental truth about modern warfare. The human adaptability would always be more powerful than technological rigidity. Her squadron became a focal point of military innovation. Sergeant David Shun, her electronic warfare specialist, found himself at the center of a new approach to military technology integration. Their methods were being studied, their communication protocols being reimagined. Military academies began to incorporate elements of their approach into training curricula. The traditional separation between technological systems and human operators was being challenged. Rodriguez and her team were not just pilots. They were living proof that the most advanced weapon system was a human mind fully integrated with technology. International military conferences began to discuss what was now being called the Rodriguez Doctrine, an approach to combat that prioritized human strategic thinking over pure technological superiority. The laugh that had echoed through combat frequencies was no longer just a moment. It had become a movement. For Sarah Rodriguez, the true mission was just beginning. She understood that her encounter was not an endpoint, but a starting point. A moment that would challenge existing paradigms and open up entirely new ways of thinking about human potential. In the complex world of international conflict, she had done more than win a battle. She had started a revolution. The world saw Sarah Rodriguez as an invincible warrior, a legend etched in military folklore. But behind the celebrated pilot was a human being carrying a weight that no metal could measure. Post-mission debriefings became a psychological minefield. Military psychologists, some of the most experienced in handling combat stress, found themselves challenged by Sarah's complex emotional landscape. She wasn't struggling in the way traditional combat veterans did. Her challenge was something far more nuanced, the profound moral complexity of modern warfare. Dr. Olivia Chun, the lead military psychologist assigned to her case, recognized early that Sarah was unlike any soldier she had ever evaluated. Most warriors compartmentalize. She would later write in her groundbreaking study, Rodriguez doesn't compartmentalize. She processes. And that processing is both her greatest strength and her deepest vulnerability. The nightmares were not about combat scenes. They were about potential alternate realities. Sarah would wake up in cold sweats, not seeing the enemies she had neutralized, but imagining the families, the children, the entire human ecosystems that existed around those strategic targets. Her squadron saw glimpses of this inner struggle. During quiet moments, between missions, she would sit apart from the group, her eyes focused on something far beyond the immediate environment. Sergeant David Chun, who knew her better than most, understood that she was constantly running complex moral calculations in her mind. It's not about killing, he once told a fellow officer who didn't understand. For Sarah, every mission is a complex ecosystem of human decisions. She doesn't see targets. She sees consequences. The military medal ceremonies became increasingly difficult for her. While her fellow soldiers celebrated her achievements, Sarah saw only the intricate human cost of conflict. Each medal felt like a weight, not an honor. Her relationship with her family became a critical emotional anchor. Weekend calls with her parents became more than just conversations. They were a lifeline to a world beyond military strategy, beyond the constant calculus of survival and mission objectives. Elena Rodriguez, her mother, became her most profound source of emotional support. A high school literature teacher with a deep understanding of human complexity, she recognized the toll that Sarah's extraordinary path was taking. "Mia," she would say during their long phone conversations, "your strength is not just in what you do. It's in how you feel about what you do." The personal sacrifices were significant. Relationships became challenging. How do you build intimacy when your entire professional existence is defined by national security protocols? Potential partners found themselves both attracted to and intimidated by her complexity. There was one relationship that came close. With Michael Darrett, a civilian humanitarian worker she had met during a mission. He understood complexity in a way most military personnel did not. Their connection was intellectual, emotional, profound, but ultimately impossible to sustain under the weight of their different worlds. Military leadership began to recognize that Sarah was more than just a pilot. She was a living case study in the psychological evolution of modern warriors. Her ability to process moral complexity while maintaining operational excellence made her both an asset and a challenge to traditional military structures. The constant international attention became another layer of psychological pressure. Media outlets wanted a simplified narrative, the heroic female pilot who defied odds. But Sarah understood that real heroism was never simple. Her father, Miguel, became her most significant emotional translator. A veteran who had seen the complex realities of military service, he understood the invisible wounds that came with extraordinary service. Valor isn't about not feeling, he would tell her during their private conversations. Valor is about feeling everything and still moving forward. Therapy became a critical component of her ongoing service. But traditional military psychological support proved inadequate. Sarah required a more holistic approach, one that recognized the profound interconnection between emotional intelligence and strategic capability. Dr. Olivia Chun developed a unique psychological support framework specifically for Sarah. It wasn't about managing trauma. It was about understanding how her extraordinary emotional capacity was actually her greatest strategic asset. The military began to recognize that soldiers like Sarah represented a new paradigm of military service. They weren't just operators of complex technological systems. They were integrated human technology ecosystems with emotional intelligence as a critical operational component. Sarah's journals from this period became something of a legend within military psychological circles. They weren't just mission logs. They were philosophical explorations of human conflict, technological evolution, and the profound moral complexities of modern warfare. Every mission is a conversation, one entry read, not just with an enemy, but with the entire human ecosystem surrounding that conflict. Technology doesn't solve human problems. It merely amplifies our existing human capacities for destruction and for understanding. Her squadron became her family in ways that went beyond traditional military bonds. They recognized that supporting Sarah wasn't about managing a legendary pilot. It was about supporting a complex human being who was reimagining the very nature of military service. As years passed, Sarah began to understand that her greatest mission wasn't about the battles she had fought. It was about demonstrating a new way of understanding conflict, one that recognized the profound humanity that existed on all sides of any confrontation. The weight of valor, she realized, was not about the medals or the missions. It was about maintaining your humanity in the most inhuman of circumstances. The lecture hall at West Point was packed. Students from multiple disciplines, military strategy, engineering, international relations, sat in rapt attention. At the podium stood Sarah Rodriguez, no longer just a legendary pilot, but a comprehensive thinker who had transformed understanding of modern warfare. 20 years had passed since her most famous mission. The world had changed. Technology had evolved. But the fundamental human elements that made her extraordinary remained timeless. Her introduction was delivered by Dr. Elena Petrova, now a distinguished professor of aerospace engineering and strategic studies. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Rodriguez, she began, is not just a pilot who changed military history. She is a living testament to how human intelligence can transcend technological limitations. The journey from that small Texas border town to this prestigious lecture hall had been anything but linear. After her active military service, Sarah had become something more complex than a traditional veteran. She was a scholar, a strategist, a bridge between military technology and human understanding. Her research focused on what she called integrated human technology ecosystems, a revolutionary approach that saw technological systems not as separate from human operators, but as extensions of human cognitive capabilities. Military academies, technology companies, and international policy institutes sought her insights. The Rodriguez Institute for Strategic Innovation, which she founded, became a global think tank that challenged existing paradigms. It wasn't just a military research center. It was a place where technology, psychology, ethics, and strategy converged. Her parents watched her evolution with a mixture of pride and wonder. Miguel Rodriguez, now retired, would often reflect on the young girl who used to dismantle engines in their small garage. Elena, still teaching literature, saw her daughter as a living narrative of human potential. Some are born to observe the world, Miguel would say, echoing his decades-old wisdom. Some are born to change it. Sarah, she was born to reimagine it. The personal cost of her extraordinary journey was evident. Multiple relationships had come and gone. The humanitarian worker, Michael Garrett, remained a significant but distant connection, a reminder of the complex world she navigated. But Sarah had discovered that her true relationships extended beyond traditional personal bonds. Her squadron, those who had fought alongside her during her most critical missions, had become her true family. They weren't just former colleagues. They were a living network of individuals who had witnessed and participated in a transformative moment in military history. International recognition came in multiple forms. The United Nations invited her to speak on conflict resolution. Technology companies sought her insights on artificial intelligence and human-machine interaction. Military academies worldwide incorporated elements of her strategic approach into their training protocols. But for Sarah, the most meaningful recognition came from unexpected sources. Young women who had been inspired by her story. Military personnel who saw her not as a legend, but as a blueprint for a more holistic approach to service. During one particularly powerful lecture at a technology conference, she articulated her core philosophy. Technology is not a replacement for human intelligence, she told a global audience. It is an amplification of our most profound human capacities for understanding, for empathy, for strategic thinking. Her research began to influence areas far beyond military strategy. Educational institutions started exploring our models of integrated learning. Technology companies began to see human-machine interaction not as a technological challenge, but as a psychological evolution. The Rodriguez Doctrine, as it became known, was more than a military strategy. It was a philosophical approach to understanding complex systems, whether in warfare, technology, or human interactions. Her relationship with the military remained complex. She was both a celebrated veteran and a critical voice that challenged traditional military thinking. Some saw her as a revolutionary. Others saw her as a necessary evolution of military philosophy. Personal moments remained her most profound. Weekend calls with her aging parents. Quiet conversations with her former squadron members. Mentoring young professionals who saw in her a possibility of reimagining their own potential. The nightmares of her combat years had transformed. Where once they were filled with the intense moments of conflict, they now became philosophical explorations. Dreams of potential futures. Visions of conflict resolution that went beyond traditional military approaches. Her latest book, Beyond Targets, Humanity in Complex Systems, became a global bestseller. It wasn't just a military memoir. It was a comprehensive exploration of how human intelligence could transform seemingly insurmountable challenges. During a retrospective interview, a young journalist asked her the inevitable question, would she do it all again? Sarah's response was characteristically complex. Every moment, she said, was a conversation, not just with an enemy or with technology, but with the profound potential of human understanding. As she stood in that West Point lecture hall, looking at a new generation of potential leaders, Sarah Rodriguez understood that her greatest mission was not the battles she had fought. It was the conversations she had started about technology, about conflict, about the extraordinary potential that exists when human intelligence is given the space to truly evolve. Her father's words echoed once more. Some are born to observe the world. Some are born to change it. Sarah Rodriguez was born to reimagine it.